Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Soil Talks, the podcast where we explore how science, innovation, and local communities work together to improve soil health. I'm Andrés Rodríguez Seijo, Project Coordinator of InBestSoil, a European project that brings together researchers, farmers, foresters, and a wide community of stakeholders with a common goal, protecting and enhancing soil health. Our mission is to demonstrate that healthy soil is not just an ecological asset, it is the engine of profitable and resilient business models. After visiting the dehesas of Extremadura in our last episode, today we'll travel to the Atlantic region, specifically to the Betuwe area in the Netherlands, a country that is the world leader in agricultural technology, but which also faces major sustainability change. Today, we explore the Lighthouse 7, located at Ekoboerderij de Lingehof, a 130 hectares farm that is pioneer in organic and biodynamic agriculture. Joining us is Linda Calciolari, Linda is an expert in regenerative agriculture and the coordinator of the Lighthouse 7 at Ekoboerderij de Lingehof, a farm that combines biodynamic principles with cutting-edge technology to restore the soil biology. Welcome, Linda.
Hi, Andres. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today to the Soil Talks. Well, before we get into the soil science, can you paint us a picture of the farm? How did the farm come to be? What did it look like today? And what drove the decision to go to biodynamic?
So Ekoboerderij de Lingehof is today organic and biodynamic on a relatively large scale. You already mentioned 130 hectares, and actually are growing. And the Betuwe area, for most listeners that are not in the Netherlands, is an area of in between the rivers. So it's a land of rivers, we call it sometimes. It's relatively flat. It's mostly clay. And in particular, the place where we are is close to an estate. So it is a relatively traditional area with a lot of trees and landscape elements. So not only big fields, although this is quite a normal landscape in the Betuwe in general, but also small fields with a more, I would say, romantic setting. And the history of the farm is that it started about 20 years ago. The founder, Andrés Rodríguez, was born in the area, also in a farming family, but he didn't immediately start this farm. So before that, he worked on other farms as a young farmer assistant, and he also immigrated to Canada for a few years, seeing if he wanted to settle there. But in the end, his roots started calling back. So he had the opportunity to come back in the Betuwe, in Randwijk, where we are now. And the opportunity came because the estate owner was looking for a farmer to grow organically in what is today Ekoboerderij de Lingehof. And the question for organic came because on the other side of most of our fields is an area for the extraction of drinking water. So from a perspective of maintaining water quality in the area, they were looking for someone that would grow crops without chemicals. And the farm started organic in 2005. That's almost precisely 20 years ago. And around 2018, Andre decided to make the step to biodynamic. This step was coming from different reasons. One of the reasons was that the farm was already quite close to what is the biodynamic standard. So Andre had not been just sticking to the organic standard during the years, but he had also been pushing actually towards more system approach. And there was also a matter of market, so the possibility to access different markets in a different niche if we would become biodynamic. And the only big step that needed to be done was actually to slightly change the fertilization of of the farm. So that was done. And since then, we have actually also been pushing more. So the biodynamic approach, what what we enjoy about the biodynamic approach is that it's really a system perspective. So in organic, it's about a few no's. And it's not, I wanted almost to say simple, but it's not simple no's. No chemicals, no mineral fertilizers, and no GMOs. Sorry, chemical fertilizer and not GMOs. So that's already few no's that make your system quite more complex. But with biodynamic, you really see the farm as a system. So the farm is not just the land of the farm, but it's also the context in which farming takes place. So that takes into account environmental, but also the social circumstances, and puts some extra requirements that really push a farmer to try to be circular as well as sustainable on its own little land.
Yeah, thank you for this picture. That is a very nice picture of the work that was carried out. Now we focus more about the farm. This 130-hectare farm is not as a living laboratory for regenerative agriculture. In this Atlantic region, what were the most critical challenges that your soil were facing?
So our soil, as I mentioned, is river clay. Clay is quite sensitive to compaction in itself, so it's a soil that requires quite a bit of attention. And in our case, this means that we have to be very careful about the time in which we come to the field, because if it's too wet, we're gonna actually compact our soil, especially with large machinery that we have to work with at this scale. And if it is too dry, we actually work with bricks, pretty much. So in that sweet spot in between, we have to do everything. And the price for getting it wrong is that we ruin our soil for a few years to come. This has become more difficult in recent years because of more extreme climate events. I'm thinking now about 2014, where we had a really long wet spell with a lot of rain that made it impossible for us to come on the field before end of April, beginning of May, which is very deleterious for many of the earlier crops. But also this year, actually, we had quite extreme drought periods, so really no rain for a longer time. And then suddenly we had, for instance, one day in which we had 40 millimeters of rain in one go. This is quite remarkable and uncommon, as I hear from older farmers for our area, but it's becoming more and more normal that we have longer wet periods and longer dry periods. And that makes farming on clay sometimes challenging. Although I must say that for us, for now, the bigger challenge is in wet circumstances, because we cannot do anything about the wet soil. But for a dry soil, we're still able for now to irrigate. And further, for our area and for the Netherlands in general, nitrogen is a bit of a big issue, in the sense that there is a lot of nitrogen in agricultural sector, but also in natural areas through leaching. For our particular case, that's not really a big issue, because we fertilize very little and from organic sources. And actually, we had some measurements around our plots that showed that we have as little leaching as a forest soil in some cases. So that's quite good. But for the Netherlands as a whole, that's definitely a challenge.
Wow, too many challenges that we need to face every day in the farm, really, that you need to do. Well, this farm is built on the river clay, but how does this very specific type of soil influence your day-to-day decisions, especially regarding the soil compaction?
So as I mentioned, clay has a specific moment in which we can work, and that's when it's not too wet and not too dry. And that's sometimes quite a short moment, because maybe the soil is just dry enough and you're expecting maybe a rain in 2 days or 3 days. So you need to do a lot of work in one time. So this led to the fact that this farm is quite heavily mechanized. So we have a wide range of machinery, and also the possibility to work with a wide range of machinery at the same time. So we have multiple tractors, so the multiple colleagues can do work at the same time. But we also try to invest in efficiency. And efficiency comes usually with some form of innovation and technological advancement. So we need to be fast, and we need to do as much as possible in one drive. So this led to systems like GPS driven activities. So all of our fields will be organized in lines that we always drive, and that's with GPS guided. But also things like a camera-driven cultivator that we introduced a couple of years ago. So this is a system in which you have a camera that moves the machine a few centimeters to the left or to the right when you're doing your weeding management. And this allows you actually to be very effective one drive, because you follow the row entirely. So this corrects also for the few centimeters of drift that we have with GPS, but also things like a sowing machine that can plant multiple crops at the same time, each at the right depth. So in a way, this soil promoted a certain choice in technology at the farm. And it's also, I must say, a bit of a passion of the team, but also of Andre. And that's also our mission, to show that you can produce high value, healthy crops in an organic way while also being an innovator.
Well, one of the flagship practices is crop rotation for soil building. I'm aware that your crop rotation is a less 1:6 ratio, which is the ratio, the bare minimum for soil recovery.
Yeah, so I would say 1:6 does not necessarily have to be the bare minimum, but it is the bare minimum for us. And that's based on our practices and on our system. So if one would have a rotation with a lot of mixed cropping, for instance, I could imagine that you could lower the number. But for ourselves, it's also needed for the type of crops we grow. In general, in organic agriculture, it's advised to start with 1:5, 1:6, and actually even more would be better. And the idea behind is that you have many different families of crops and many different families that bring and take something different from the soil. And at the same time, it's also a good way to prevent the spread of diseases in your crop by building in a buffer of multiple years of other different crop families. How the rotation looks like in our case is that about half of it is extensive and soil building crops, and the other half is more intensive crops. And the intensive crops pay, essentially they're more cash crops, and they pay for the investment that we do in the soil with the extensive crops. We normally start with 2 years of grass clover. That's the only crop that we grow on the farm that is not for human consumption. And the idea of the grass clover is that the grass has very fine roots, so it decompresses the soil, and the clover is a nitrogen fixer. So we have 2 years of building soil health and the biodiversity in the soil. And we invest those 2 years in the next crop, that is the onions. And onions is really a cash crop on the farm. It's one of the most important ones. And it really likes a slow release of nutrients, which grass clover is an amazing crop for. After the onions, we have a resting crop. It's usually a cereal. And then we have another intensive crop that can be a pumpkin or a red beet or a sugar maize. And after that, we have another resting crop. We might repeat this cycle a couple of times, so intensive crop and resting crop. In those cases, we have more than 1:6 rotation. And then we always conclude, after our last resting crop, we always do potatoes. And the potatoes is there as last because it's quite intensive for the soil structure. You open the soil, you plant the tubers, you have to make these ridges and break them up again for the harvest. And that's why after that, we like to have our grass clover again for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And before the potato, we do like to have a nitrogen fixing crop, we try to have at least 1/6 of our rotation as nitrogen fixing crops. And in this case, it would be lupin.
That's in this case, what happens is the farmer try to shorter cycles, for example. Instead, it's 2-year cycle that you mentioned.
So I expect we would see it back in our in the resilience of our crops, but also in the vitality, like how healthy the crops are. Because if we would try to, especially if we would cut out all the extensive crops in favor of the cash crops, I expect at some point we would start taking more from the soil than we actually add. Especially in biodynamic, where we're quite limited in the amount of nitrogen in particular that we can add to the soil. So at some point, I expect that we're gonna start depleting our soil. And in general, this type of rotation is an insurance, right? It's a way that you prevent diseases. For us, when we have a disease, there are some ways to manage diseases. In organic, there are some inputs you can use, but we don't want to use them actually. So all you can do is prevention. So a solid crop rotation is your prevention.
You are also experts in cover crop mixtures. Instead of a single species, you mix mustard, clover, sunflower, and buckwheat. Well, how does this help protect the soil during the Dutch winters? What are the advantages of this crop mixture?
So at our farm, we always start from diversity. So the idea that a diverse crop is always better for the soil than a single crop. This is difficult to realize in your crops that you harvest during the year. But for a cover crop, this suddenly becomes much more interesting because we're not harvesting. So the logistics is much easier. And what we like to do as a base for a cover crop mixture is to mix at least a cereal, so something from the grass family, a nitrogen fixer, that's usually a clover, and mustard family as a base, because they have very different root system and also very different effects on soil and soil biodiversity. And then that's the base, and then we add a few more species for diversity. Sometimes that's something that we order. Sometimes that's something that we have laying from a previous season. So things like a buckwheat or a sunflower or a linseed. And the idea is that by having many different type of plants, we also feed many different types of soil microorganisms. And of course, different plants are also better at taking and holding different nutrients in the soil. So it's also a way for us to make the best of the fertilization of the previous year and don't let it leach during the winter. And a good crop cover for the soil, it's also a very good way to protect the upper layer of your soil from compaction, mild compaction from winter rains.
Yeah, we'll change something. We'll talk about something about very specific you are testing. This is the Johnson composting. Can you explain more about this? How this method differs from the conventional composting?
So the Johnson Sioux composting entered our farm as a way to try to make the best of our nutrients. As a biodynamic farm, I already mentioned we are limited in the amount of nitrogen we can bring on the land. And we also must obtain most of this nitrogen from straw manure. And this is a type of manure that is not very available in the Netherlands, because most farms will have a system that produces slurry manure and also needs to be organic. So it's even a smaller amount that is available for us to use. So our idea was to try to increase the efficiency of our plants in the uptake of the nutrients we can bring on the field. And one of the methods that came to our attention that we're testing, so it's in a testing phase, is the use of composting. And I think we're going to touch on it a bit later, but for making composting, it's good to have a very high quality compost. And then you don't need a lot of it to make it work, even at our scale. And Johnson's Zoo is a system in which you can produce relatively small batches of compost that does not require turning. And the turning of compost, it's an interesting aspect because, of course, in compost you have many different types of microorganisms, and bacteria are more units that lay loose in the compost, but fungi, they like to make hyphae, they like to make threads. And every time you turn, you break those threads. So the idea of Johnson's Zoo is that you create a fungal-rich compost. And fungus is the fungi are really the type of microorganisms that are more difficult to get on in a still relatively intensive annual cropping system. So we want to focus on those. So we created the perfect environment for the development of fungi by using a high CN ratio of 30. That is a bit more favorable to our fungi. And we do this by mixing wood chips, straw, and a tiny bit of organic manure to get to this rate, as much as possible from our own farm. And then we create a situation in which the compost is aerated passively. So we put it in containers in which on all sides there are openings through which the oxygen can enter. So it's going to be an aerobic process, but it doesn't require turning.
Mm. And how do you apply this Johnson's Zoo compost on a large farm like yours? You did that. You have 130 hectares to apply this.
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing about compost tea, or what interested us about compost tea is the logistics of it. So you can make an extraction of the compost, and then you want a good quality compost that is very rich in nutrients. And we use it in two ways, actually, compost extract and compost tea. And compost extract is simply extracting the microorganisms of the compost by using water. So we mix compost with water, and then we take out the compost part, the solid part, and that allows us to bring it on the field as a liquid. And in the water that we use, there are a lot of organisms that come from the compost. And this system, it offers much more diversity of microorganisms, but less amounts, because obviously you can just take out what's in the compost at that time. Compost tea, on the other hand, involves also adding a nutrient source for the microorganisms and then leaving some time to multiply. So we would add compost, water, some kind of food, so that can be a starch or carbohydrate or a sugar, and then have a machine that aerates the solution and leave it there for 24 hours. And in this time, the microorganisms can multiply. And this has the advantage that you get much more amounts, biomass of microorganisms in your solution. However, you always automatically select for the ones that you created the circumstances for. And we use the extract mainly as a seed coating at the moment, so in the field when we seed, and the compost tea as a leaf spray solution. And for us, as a biodynamic farm, we never had a sprayer, so that was a bit of a technical challenge for us, because we actually don't want necessarily a sprayer. So this year we tried for the first time using drones to apply compost tea on our plants. And it's still in a testing phase, but our hope is that these microorganisms will help the plant to access nutrients in the soil that would otherwise be less accessible. So to make the best out of what is there. We don't expect necessarily an increase in yield, although it would be nice. But we hope that we can either get the same with less fertilization or get better quality with the same fertilization.
You are also making the strong bets on crops such as the wild lupin and the quinoa. What role does a healthy soil play in this protein transition?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I would turn it around actually. What do these crops do for a healthy soil? Of course, a healthy soil is nice for all crops. But I think there is really something to be said for adding more diversity in the agricultural landscape, because that's what in the end allows us to have a healthy soil. And the problem with these minor crops is that the market is not developed enough that that many farmers adopt this crop. So everyone is actually growing the same few crops, but it would be really nice if we all could grow much more lupin or quinoa, because there is a market for it. And in particular, I take the case of lupin. So lupin is a fantastic crop in that it's nitrogen fixing. So it adds fertilization to your soil without you having to do extra work, and it actually keeps the nitrogen in the soil for the next crop in the form of the remains of the lupin crop. And it's also fantastic for pollinators. In particular, the bumblebees really enjoy the lupin flowers. It's not a nectar source, so pollinators, they do like also a diverse diet like most of us. And some plants give nectar, and lupin is a very good source of pollen, which is a protein and fat source, which is particularly important for the young bumblebees and bees and other pollinators. So, but I think every minor crop, every different crop has something to add in the farming system, and it would be a beautiful landscape, but also a beautiful system, the one where we have many more different crops. Then it also becomes easier to have a 1 on 6, 7, 8 crop rotation.
Okay. Well, this is not a smooth sailing. What risks do you face when planting such as vigorous and winter hardy cover crop mixtures if you encounter an especially rainy that spring?
Yeah, so you're mentioning almost precisely a situation we had to face a couple of years ago. So one of the ways we try to care for our soil is by reducing tilling. And one of the ways we do this in recent years is with the flache rotte system, which means surface fermentation. How it works is we plant a cover crop during the winter. That's one of these mixtures we talk about, which is a winter hard crop. It will stay throughout the winter and also in the spring. And by the time spring comes, we have a green crop with quite a bit of biomass, which we then chop finely, shallowly work in the soil, and add plant ferment to. And these ferments that I'm talking about is essentially microbes, bacteria, that will process the green material and digest it and add the nutrients to the soil. It's actually quite a nice system. The only problem is it requires time and timing. Time, because between the time that you do the flache rotte and the time you can prepare the soil and seed, you have to take a couple of weeks. So it takes 2 weeks to digest the green biomassa. And timing, because of course you need to be on the field, especially for us on clay, at the time that you can drive with a relatively heavy piece of equipment. And what happened in 2024 is that we had a really long wet spell, so a lot of rain. It essentially started raining in November and it stopped somewhere in April. And I know very well because I bike to work every day. And so we couldn't come on the field. So we had a green manure that kept on growing, and it was actually a beautiful green manure. But by the time we could come to the field, it was a lot of material to process, and it was already April. And the soil was also not getting dry because it was covered by a green manure, which is fantastic in a period of drought, of course. So by the time we could come to the fields, we needed extra time to process this green manure, and then we still needed to wait 2 weeks to be able to do any seedbed preparation and planting. So we could come on the fields end of April, and then only by half May we were able to do anything on the field, which it's okay if you have a late crop like beets or pumpkins. We normally only plant in half May because of the risk of frost in the Netherlands. But we also lost a crop of quinoa because we tried to prepare this field, but it was just too early and too wet, and it just didn't work. So and then you see someone, like you see your neighbor that has been plowing in the winter, and he was on the field 1 to 1.5 months before us because his green manure has frozen. He had been plowing, so the soil was more open and it could dry out more quickly. So he was ahead of us. And you also see farmers that are conventional that could still fix the nutrients in their fields by adding fertilizers. Well, for us, we do our fertilization in the fall with straw manure, and that manure had been washed away during such a wet winter, and we didn't have the chance to add any fertilization in the spring because it was too wet. So that's what you see, that we do try to build resilience, but it is still hard when you have extreme weather events.
Yeah.
So now what we do actually to fix our adaptation to this is that we still use the Flagerotte system, but only for crops that can be sown late. So that's our buffer. So then there is still ways to adapt, and you have to learn which practice works for which situation and which crop.
Good. Well, InBestSoil seeks to economically value soil health. Beyond the saving on fertilizers, how you are driving new value chains or business models to ensure that the markets recognize and pays a fair price for this extra value provided by the soil health that you are restoring?
So one of the most basic ways we do this is by being certified. So organic and biodynamic certification makes recognizable for the client, but also along the whole value chain, that we do something that is good for soil health by not using chemicals, by using straw manure, etc. But what we also see is the need to build the markets for the crops and for the practices. So what I mentioned, there are many farmers that want to grow lupin. Actually, we have by now a network of farmers that are also pioneering with us on this. But there is a need for a market to be developed, for the consumer to know that lupin is good for the soil, that you can use it for your food, that is healthy, and then to buy this crop and also to pay a fair price for the farmer. That's the only way we as farmers can make something happen on the field. So from this perspective, actually came also an initiative that that Andre actually co-founded, that is called the Lekker Lupine. In Dutch, it means tasty lupin, and it's a startup and also a bit of a platform organization that tries to create the value chain of lupin, so from farm to fork. And we act on different levels of the value chain. At field level, we try to support farmers that are wanting to learn to grow lupin. So we give them knowledge, we facilitate inputs, we give assistance during the season, and we promise to take over their crop and try to market it as good as possible. The second step is in the value chain, so collaborating with organizations that add value to the lupin by creating delicious products. So think of spreads, think of fermented products. We also are making now a pasta from lupin flour, which is also used in bread, in cookies, in many different things. And we keep on pushing and try to create more products. And the third one is community. So also the communication around it, but also try to create solid working relationships. So not just being a provider of a crop, but also try to work with companies that see the value of lupin and commit to it. So for instance, we have a long-term collaboration with a factory that packages lupin under their own label. And for them, it would be much easier to buy lupin in France or in Germany, where it's cheaper. But they have been working with Lekker Lupine since the beginning, and they have committed to buy lupin from Dutch soil. It's so they put it on the package that is lupin from Dutch soil, even though economically it does not make as much sense for them. But that's the power of building a relationship and also motivating people to do something that is good for the local landscape. And we are also trying at farm level to do something with the regenerative farming, both by stimulating short value chains. So we recently set up a cleaning facility for cereals, seeds, and beans. And we make this available for other small-scale farmers, medium-scale farmers that try to sell their product in a short chain. So, for instance, to the local mill, the local baker, because this is a step that we saw it's missing very often. So if you go with 3 boxes of 3 tons of wheat of a special variety, ancient variety, to a large-scale cleaning facility, they're not going to take it because it's too much of a hassle for them to do this for a small amount. But we try to specialize on this to facilitate farmers to be able to do this. And we are part of these farmers, of course, so we need what's we know what's needed and what's the value of it. But it's again an example of how you need different steps along the value chain and different business model, because this is also a separate business model for us, in order to make the sustainability change in the whole system.
Good. This is also linked to the next question, that is, if a conventional farmer wants to start the transition towards regenerative practices tomorrow, what will be the first step that you will recommend for the crop rotation or even for the business models?
Yeah, so it's a very wide question. If I was a conventional farmer right now, I would wonder where to start. I know from conventional farmers around us that one of the easier steps to start with is green manures, to have more diverse green manures. I know the surface fermentation system, the Vlaggerotte system, is also quite accessible, because I know that both organic and conventional farmers are now applying this practice. And this is quite easy because it's outside of your main crop rotation. So it's a bit of it's a part of your crop rotation where you're less maybe worried about the risks. The next step would be to find a buyer for a new crop and start growing that crop. Because I can tell you, like, start growing 3 more crops, but if you don't have a market, that's gonna last for very short. And I mean, if we're talking about regenerative practices, I do think that I don't want to say going organic, but going as much as possible towards organic. That's in any case a very good start. I do think that at the moment we use a lot more inputs than strictly necessary. And I think trying to really minimize the inputs would be a great start towards regenerative, but not the easiest one. So, and organic fertilization, like straw manure, really organic fertilizers, even if you're not organic, they do add a lot of health and resilience to the soil, organic matter, and more than just NPK. So the more complete type of fertilization. And I know from experiences of conventional farmers that started working more with straw manures, that they were very positive about the effect it had on the soil. You don't need to be organic to do organic fertilization.
Okay, good. Very nice recommendation that probably will help to potential farmers to change their mind and go more ahead of the more sustainable practice. Well, to close, what message would you like to leave for the consumers about the relationship between the soils of the Betuwe and the proteins they buy on the supermarket?
So I recently was in a focus group with many different farmers, but also beer brewers and millers and bakers. And the topic of the meeting was local value chains in cereals. And one sentence of a miller stuck with me, which was that he wishes that consumers, that people can experience the landscape through food and through drinks. And I think that's the most important thing. We sometimes don't think about where the food comes from, especially the supermarket where it's packaged and often not recognizable. And I think, and I would invite all citizens, consumers listening to the podcast to think about the picture of what type of landscape would you enjoy, what type of landscape do you want to live in, and then eat accordingly. And for me, a landscape I would want to eat is a landscape where you have many different crops, blossoming beans and pollinators, a few cows for sure. And that's what I like to buy and eat.
Yep.
And that's what we work every day for.
Good, very good. Well, thank you so much, Linda, for showing us that technology and biology can work hand in hand to feed the world by caring of the planet and the soils. Thank you so much for this interesting talk we have today. And,
Thank you.
And to all of listeners, thank you for joining us. And don't miss the next episode of Soil Talks that we talk about different concepts about soil health and soil debt and how to invest in soil practice. Thank you.